Yes, all eyes of the nation is on Alabama today. The state planning the first ever execution attempt with nitrogen hypoxia. And we're going to take a deep dive into how it will work.
Kenneth Eugene Smith this is for the second time that he'll walk down death row and then be strapped to a gurney. We have the timeline of today's execution.
And protests erupting, people from all across the U.S. descending on Atmore today for their plea of change.
And we do have team coverage for you this morning. And we also have some full coverage all day long leading up to Smith's final breath. But before we get into that team coverage this morning, we want to start with how this all started. The brutal killing of Elizabeth Sennett.
Now, it was in 1988 when Elizabeth's husband, Pastor Charles Sennett, paid Kenneth Smith and John Parker $1,000 to kill her. The men broke into her home on Coon Dog Cemetery Road in Colbert County. She was then stabbed and beaten to death with a fireplace poker. Charles Sennett later killed himself. Smith and Parker were sentenced to death row. Parker was executed in 2010.
Now for Smith.
No one had ever died this way before. Not in America. Not in a prison. Not by court order. On January 25, 2024, Kenneth Eugene Smith became the first human being in U.S. history to be executed using pure nitrogen gas. A method once imagined for animals. A plan once dismissed as too experimental. Alabama called it painless. But what happened behind the witness glass told a different story. Smith convulsed. His body shook uncontrollably. His feet kicked, hands curled tight. Witnesses described it as torture wearing a medical mask. He didn't scream. But he didn't go quietly either. "I'm leaving with love, peace, and light," he said. Tonight, Alabama causes humanity to take a step backwards. His exact words. He was supposed to die in 2022. The straps were tight. The 4 needles were sharp. The clock was ticking. But Alabama couldn't do it. For 4 hours, they stabbed at his arms, his neck, his feet, trying to find a vein. Blood ran down his skin. He vomited, trembled, and waited. But the state failed. Kenneth Eugene Smith walked off the gurney that night. Alive. And for a moment, it seemed the system had broken itself. That maybe, just maybe, he'd live to die behind bars instead. But the state of Alabama doesn't forget. And it doesn't forgive. So 2 years later they tried again. But this time with gas. Not the kind that knocks you out. The kind that pulls the oxygen from your lungs, while the world watches. To understand why they were so desperate to kill him, why they invented a new method just to finish the job, you need to know what he did in 1988. And who paid him to do it. This story is a murder for hire case, involving a pastor, a wife, and 3 men. 2 were executed, 1 died in prison, and 1 committed suicide. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you real-life stories that shake the soul. If you're finding this story compelling, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime breakdowns. Years earlier. The year is 1988. The town is Sheffield, Alabama, nestled in quiet Colbert County. A place where people leave doors unlocked, where a preacher's word is as strong as law. But behind the doors of one home, a plan is brewing, one soaked in betrayal and greed. Reverend Charles Sennett Sr. is drowning in debt. His finances are collapsing, his secret affair is hanging by a thread, and his only escape in his mind is death. Not his own, but his wife's. So he can cash out on her life insurance. Her name is Elizabeth Dorleen Sennett. A 45-year-old mother, kind and trusting. She has no idea that her husband is preparing to have her murdered. Charles recruits Billy Gray Williams, a man he knows well, one of his tenants. He doesn't care about Williams' background. He only cares that Williams will do it for money. Charles promises to pay him $3,000, and Williams accepts. But Williams doesn't want to do it alone. He brings in 2 other men, Kenneth Eugene Smith and John Forrest Parker. The job is now divided 3 ways. Each man gets $1,000. 3 men, each promised blood money for a woman's life. On March 18, 1988, Elizabeth Sennett is home alone. Her sons are away. Charles tells her to expect 2 men, says they'll be coming by to look at the property for hunting purposes. Elizabeth trusts him. She always has. That morning, Smith and Parker arrive at the home. They don't come in guns blazing. They smile, act casual, tell her Charles gave them permission to scout the land. She calls her husband to confirm, and he tells her, yes, let them in. She has no clue that he's already given them money to buy a gun, a weapon meant for her murder. But instead of buying a gun, Smith and Parker spend the money on drugs. They arrive high, armed only with a 6-inch survival knife and whatever they can find around the house. That doesn't stop them. It only makes the murder more chaotic and brutal. At first, they walk around the property, pretending to look for hunting spots. Elizabeth stays inside, unaware. Then they knock again. This time, they ask to use the bathroom. She opens the door. They step in. The moment the door closes, everything changes. While Parker distracts her in the hallway, Smith sneaks behind her. He grabs a fireplace tool, then a walking cane, then a galvanized pipe, striking her over and over. Elizabeth fights. She screams. She claws at them. But the drugs have made the men unpredictable. Smith keeps hitting. Parker joins in. And then comes the knife. She is stabbed 8 times. Deep, fatal wounds. And 2 deep stabs on each side of her neck. Her blood soaks the carpet. It's not fast. It's not clean. It's not quiet. Before leaving, the men stage the home. They take a VCR and a stereo, hoping to make it look like a robbery. They wipe down a few surfaces. But the violence is too personal. Too messy. When Sheriff Ronnie May arrives on the scene, he knows immediately, this wasn't just a break-in. It was an execution. Elizabeth is still alive when May finds her. Barely. He can't find a pulse. But the EMTs do. They rush her to the hospital. She dies shortly after. The doctors say she fought hard, just like May said she did. When Ronnie May told Charles that Elizabeth still has a pulse, he was shocked and plays. The grieving husband. He cries. He hugs people. He shakes the sheriff's hand. But the mask doesn't last long. The home looks too staged. The wounds too violent. A tip comes in through Crime Stoppers, naming Kenneth Smith and John Parker. Investigators follow the trail to Charles. On March 25th, just 1 week after Elizabeth's murder, police bring the preacher in for questioning. He denies everything. But when someone in the room casually asks if he knows Kenneth Smith, Charles turns bright red. That moment breaks him. He leaves the interview, goes straight to his church. There, in front of his sons and their families, Charles confesses everything. The affair, the debt, the murder-for-hire plot. Then he walks outside, gets in his truck, and shoots himself in the head. The case is now cracked wide open. Search warrants are issued. Police find the missing VCR inside Kenneth Smith's home. Smith and Parker both start talking. They confirm the story. They killed Elizabeth Sennett. For money, for drugs, and for a man of God who used his wife as a lifeline. Meanwhile, after Elizabeth Sennett's murder in March 1988, everything falls apart fast. Charles Sennett's suicide opens the floodgates. And the truth comes pouring in. Kenneth Eugene Smith, John Forrest Parker, and Billy Gray Williams are all arrested within weeks. Each one tied directly to the brutal murder-for-hire plot that left Elizabeth dead in her own living room. The arrests hit the town like a storm. A preacher hired a tenant to kill his wife. That tenant hired 2 more men to do the dirty work. And in the middle of it all, 3 families now face the justice system. Let's start with Billy Gray Williams, the man who brokered the hit. The one who connected the dots between a desperate preacher and 2 killers for hire. In court, he's handed life without the possibility of parole. No second chances. He dies in prison in November 2020, after more than 3 decades behind bars. The cause of death. Undisclosed illness. Quiet. uneventful. The way his victim's death was not. John Forrest Parker, the man who helped beat and stab Elizabeth to death, is also sentenced to death. No one fights that verdict. Not the court. Not the state. Parker is executed on June 10, 2010, by lethal injection. His final words: "I'm sorry. I don't ever expect you to forgive me. I really am sorry." And just like that, he's gone. Another name scratched off the state's execution list. But Kenneth Eugene Smith's story doesn't end there. In fact, it's only just beginning. Smith's first trial takes place in Jefferson County, not Colbert. The court grants a change of venue to try to get a fair jury, away from the media storm that followed the case. In that first trial, the jury finds him guilty. 10 out of 12 jurors vote to sentence him to death. That's enough. The judge agrees and hands Smith a death sentence in 1989. But 3 years later, that entire conviction is thrown out. Appeals court vacates it. By 1996, Smith is retried. This time, the jury sees things differently. They vote 11-1 in favor of life without parole. Not innocent, but not someone who deserves to die. They see him as a follower, not a mastermind. Someone who made a fatal decision, but not the kind who should be executed. But Alabama law back then gives the judge override power, the ability to ignore the jury's recommendation. And that's exactly what the judge does. He overrules the jury and sentences Smith to death again, a decision that would shape the next 28 years of Smith's life, and his eventual death. By 2022, Smith is one of Alabama's longest-serving death row inmates. And the state decides it's time to carry out the sentence. He's scheduled for execution by lethal injection in November 2022. But what happens next stuns the entire country. The execution team straps Smith to the gurney. They search for a vein. Then another. Then another. Hours pass. Needles go in. Blood spills. But they can't find a usable vein. Smith is bleeding, sweating, vomiting, conscious the whole time. He can hear them whispering. He knows they're running out of time. Alabama's death warrant is set to expire at midnight, and if they don't get it done before then, the law says they have to stop. And that's exactly what happens. After 4 hours of failed attempts, the team gives up. Smith is unstrapped and returned to his cell, alive. The state issues a vague statement blaming vein issues. But to Smith, to his lawyers, to the witnesses, it's clear. The system failed. Now the legal chaos begins. Can the state try again? Is it cruel and unusual punishment to make a man go through this twice? Smith and Alabama eventually reach a strange settlement. In exchange for not attempting lethal injection again, the state allows Smith to select an alternate method. He chooses nitrogen hypoxia, a completely untested method of execution that had never been used on a human being anywhere in the world. Smith's lawyers argue it's experimental, dangerous, potentially torturous. But the state is determined to go through with it. The courts reject Smith's appeals. And the date is set. January 25, 2024. After surviving one execution attempt, Kenneth Eugene Smith is now set to make history. He will be the first person in the world executed using pure nitrogen gas. The stage is set. The mask is built. And once again, the world prepares to watch Alabama carry out its darkest experiment yet. It's early evening in Atmore, Alabama. The sun has set, but inside Holman Correctional Facility, everything is lit up. Bright, cold, prepared. A man is about to die, not by lethal injection, not by electric chair, but by something the state calls scientific. Nitrogen hypoxia. The world watches. No one really knows how this will go. No country has ever done this to a human being. But Alabama is ready to make history. At 4 p.m., Kenneth Eugene Smith is brought his final meal: steak, hash browns, eggs, and a dinner roll. A classic Southern breakfast for dinner. Heavy, salty, simple. He eats it slowly. No family around. Just the guards, the clock, and the walls. Outside, protesters hold signs. This is torture. Justice, not experiments. No more nitrogen. Smith already knows he's not walking out. But he's also not staying silent. At 6 p.m., he's led into the chamber. No gurney this time. No 4 bags. No medical staff. Instead, a steel chair, bolted to the floor. In the center of the room sits a large industrial mask, strapped to a tangle of hoses. It looks like something from a science lab, not a death chamber. Smith is strapped down by his chest, arms, and legs. The mask is fitted tightly over his face. It's heavy, sealed. There is no oxygen flowing through it, only pure nitrogen, ready to suffocate him. A prison official asks if he has any final words. He does. Tonight, Alabama causes humanity to take a step backwards. I'm leaving with love, peace, and light. He says it calmly, clearly. There's no anger in his voice. Just a quiet dignity that lingers in the air even after he stops speaking. Then, the valve turns. Nitrogen begins to fill the mask. There's no sound, no hissing, no gasping. At first, it's silent. But witnesses say Smith begins to twitch. His feet press against the restraints. His hands curl into fists. His chest rises and falls rapidly. Within seconds, his body begins to shake. His head jerks. His limbs move involuntarily. This was supposed to be peaceful. That's what they said. But it doesn't look peaceful. It looks like a man fighting. He convulses. His breathing becomes erratic. His lips turn blue. One witness later says it looked like someone slowly drowning in dry air. Another describes it as haunting. For 4 full minutes, Smith's body continues to move. Only after that does he go still. But even then, the gas keeps flowing. The total time? 22 minutes. That makes it the longest execution in Alabama's history. And the most controversial. No sedative. No anesthesia. Just nitrogen and time. Civil rights groups call it state-sanctioned torture. International observers say the U.S. has crossed a line. Even some conservative voices admit this felt wrong. The governor calls it justice. The prison system calls it efficient. But others ask, would this have happened if Smith were executed under today's law? Remember, in 1996, his jury voted 11-1 for life, and a judge overruled them. That override is now banned in Alabama. But Smith wasn't grandfathered in. He was executed anyway. He never denied involvement in the crime. But he wasn't the mastermind. He wasn't the husband who planned it. He didn't hold the murder weapon alone. And he survived one execution already. To some, Kenneth Smith was a killer who finally faced justice. To others, he was a man broken by a broken system, turned into a test subject in a mask. Either way, his story is now part of history. And what happened in that chamber will haunt America's conscience for years to come. After the gas cleared and Kenneth Smith's body was removed from the execution chamber, the state of Alabama called it a success. But across the world, people weren't so sure. The method, nitrogen hypoxia, was pitched as humane, quiet, painless.
Following the flow of nitrogen gas, Ms. Smith laid on the gurney and shook for about 2 minutes, shaking and writhing on that gurney. The gurney did move several times there. Following that shaking on the gurney, there were several minutes, about between 5 and 7 minutes, according to media witnesses, of heavy breathing on the gurney. Several minutes later, a correctional officer did walk up to Kenneth Smith and appeared to look over at his face. He did not touch Kenneth Smith or actually do anything that media witnesses were able to see to Kenneth Smith, but he did lean over and look at him for several minutes before walking back to the wall to return to his post there.
And a clock. Even UN human rights officials issued a statement condemning the execution, urging the U.S. to ban the method entirely. Some compared it to torture. Others said it broke international law. And here's the most haunting part. If Kenneth Smith's trial happened today, he wouldn't have been executed at all. His jury recommended life, not death. But Alabama's now outlawed judicial override let the judge overrule them. The law changed, but it came too late for him. And so Smith's death becomes more than a statistic. It becomes a mirror. A reflection of a justice system that evolves after it's already taken lives. A system where mistakes aren't undone, they're buried. Inside Alabama, the state's Department of Corrections is already preparing for more nitrogen executions. They say it's the future. Critics call it state-sanctioned suffocation. But one thing's certain, Kenneth Smith didn't die quietly. Not in 1988. Not in 2022. And not in 2024. He became a name the world won't forget. Not because of what he did, but because of how he died. And long after his body was carried out, the real question still hangs in the air. When the law gets it wrong, who pays the price? And long after his body was carried out, the real question still hangs in the air. When the law gets it wrong, who pays the price? But let's never forget the true victim in all of this. Elizabeth Sennett. A 45-year-old mother. A trusting wife. A woman who opened her door to evil because she believed in the man she married. She didn't know he was drowning in debt. She didn't know he was having an affair. She didn't know he'd chosen to have her killed instead of facing his own failures. Charles Sennett took the coward's way out. He orchestrated her murder, then pulled the trigger on himself. No accountability. No justice. Just an exit. Elizabeth deserved more. She deserved protection. She deserved love. And she deserved to grow old watching her children live full lives. To her family, her friends, and the life she never got to finish. Rest in peace, Elizabeth. You married the wrong man, but you didn't deserve the ending he gave you.